For me, an honor for me to be invited to deliver this lecture, this distinguished lecture by the three institutes together. I'm flattered, I'm deeply honored, and as somebody who has been to Kathmandu, who started coming to Kathmandu since the mid-80s, I must say this is surely the highest point in my life about my work on India-Nepal relations. So I really sincerely thank the organizers for doing me this honor, and I hope that this is the beginning of a lecture series which will surely become one of the important important sort of points of in the South Asian academic circuit as we go forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been to Kathmandu in several capacities. First as a researcher on South Asian relations, economic relations. I used to call myself, I sometimes fear these days for calling myself a sarkist, and that is what I was. I thought of myself as that, and I think still that we need a body of sarkists in South Asia to get this region moving forward. I've been here as a researcher, I've been here also as an ADB official, Asian Development Bank official, but principally again to look at regional cooperation. I've also been here to promote Indo-Nepalese business ties as the head of Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, because I was the Secretary General for 2 years. But I must say that coming here as representative of the Government of India now closes the circle very beautifully. So I've been able to come to Kathmandu from all different directions, and I must say that whenever I've been here, I've received the utmost attention, the utmost, the kind of reception that I've got, the sort of, the way I've been received, all the love and affection that I've had has been enormous. So I'm sure this will continue, and I hope to be able to continue to contribute to this as I go forward. The topic given to me and what Tawagli already mentioned is a huge canvas, and I submit to you that I could be here for the rest of the evening talking to you on the topics that have been set out, which are the promise of economic reforms, the externalities for Nepal, the innovation, the connectivity, etc. But I have to pack all of this in 30 minutes. So what I've decided to do is to make my talk in two parts. One, that I'll talk first about what is happening in India, which I think I don't need to tell this audience because you seem to know everything already that has been happening, but nonetheless maybe I'll be able to add some nuances here and there. And the second one will be on how I see Indo-Nepal relations now and going forward. I hope that will suffice, and then I'll be of course open to all the questions that I hope will come to me after in the open forum. Let me start off by saying that for India, I have the feeling in my bones, both as an ordinary citizen and also as an economist, that India is perhaps on the cusp of a very major economic transformation. And let me say that also that we have been very brave, and we have been also very fortunate, and also we've tried to have successfully completed 2 of our 3 transitions that our forefathers decided to take simultaneously. And this has been, we were probably the only country in the world where where the 3 transitions of social, political, and economic, we decided to undertake them simultaneously with the advent of our constitution. And if you look at the world history, you will find, ladies and gentlemen, that no other country really has taken them on at the same time. It's a very difficult exercise to have the highest form of democracy, the parliamentary democracy on the one hand, for people who Winston Churchill considered to be not even fit enough to have that, and said that in 10 years' time we will go back to them with the begging bowl to come and administer this again. We also undertook our social transition, whereby you have seen that we, the most underprivileged people in our society, the Dalits, their representatives have been the chief minister of the largest province in our country, not on 1 but on 4 occasions, having completed, the lady having completed a full tenure. And you've seen that social transition, and I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that those 2 transitions India has pretty much completed successfully as we talk today, without much bloodshed, loss, violence, etc., etc. And the third transition, which is the economic transition, we are in the midst of it. We are in the midst of it. We are trying now, and that is where I want to focus, which is that transition I see now being completed. And I see that we are now at the cusp of this major transformation. We are also at the same time, let me put it to you, that we are probably in the sweet spot for the first time, after a very long time. My first paper, one of the first papers that I had written when I presented that in Tokyo was India, an economy with perpetual takeoff. We were always taking off but never actually taking off. But I think today we have come to that situation where we have gathered enough momentum to achieve the escape velocity into our economic transition so that we would emerge as an upper middle income economy sooner rather than later. And let me tell you why. You've already heard the news that we have achieved 8.2% rate of growth in our first quarter of 2018-19, fiscal 19. This has come despite the fact that we've had 4 years of an investment climate which has been very, very weak, where the private investment has been pretty much kaput, where the credit offtake from commercial banks has been negative in some years to the Indian industry. The private investor, because of the legacy issues that the government inherited in the twin balance sheet problems and then the global issues, etc., private investment was not firing, and yet we have come to the situation after having reached the lowest point in the second quarter of last year when we got 5.6% GDP growth rate from April to June last year. Now we've come, every successive quarter has been higher since then, 6.7, 7.2, 7.5, and now 8.2. And going forward, I think we will achieve a minimum of 7.5 to 7.8% rate of growth for 2018-19. And this will be achieved with very strong macroeconomic stability. Our inflation rate is less than 4%. In fact, it's 3.6%. Our food inflation is now less than 2%. Our fiscal deficit is now 3.5%, and we are committed to achieving that. Our reserves are more than $400 billion as we speak, and our FDI inflows are in excess of $70 billion, etc. Even our current account deficit, which is under pressure a little bit, is going to be less than 2.4%, and we have had periods in Indian economy where this has been 4.8 and 5%, so that there is not a cause to worry. Our rupee has declined recently. Nonetheless, it is still, in real effective exchange rate terms, still higher than what it should be. So there is not a cause of great worry. So a 7.5, 7.8% rate of growth with macroeconomic stability seems to be, for me, a situation where this growth rate can be sustained as we go forward for several decades, if you like. And this is what India needs to do. And this is, I think, in some terms, we will probably, we are entering into a period where you could think of India growing at near double-digit growth rate, and some years even higher in the foreseeable future. And why do I say this? Not just because of these economic numbers that I've touted out to you, because these 4 years, and I'm again making a statement which I hope is not too provocative, which is that in these 4 years, since 2014 to now, I have seen more reform action and more action to make successful inclusion, effective inclusion of the economy, of the society, more in these 4 years than any 4-year period in the Indian post-independent economic history of India. And I have been a member of Dr. Manmohan's, and Dr. Manmohan Singh was the finance minister. I was the economic advisor during 91 to 95 before I went to the Asian Development Bank. So I have been in the government before, and I still say this. And I say this on and this thing can come out more in the question answer forms. The kind of reforms that have been taken in these 4 years are quite breathtaking, if you like. Some of them you mentioned, Dr. Wagle, and I will just repeat some of them. You know, the goods and services tax has been hanging fire for the last 12 years or something like that. This is a reform which will have impact not just in terms of creating a unified Indian market, but in terms of transaction costs going down, in terms of logistics revolution taking place, in terms of attracting foreign investment, because people have been more interested in improving our tax base, both for the direct tax and in the direct tax, in the formalization of the economy, in making our small and medium enterprises look for global production, look for participation in regional and global production chains. This is a phenomenal thing that we have achieved. And here, by the way, please remember, every country that has instituted the goods and services tax has taken at least about 2 years for it to be stabilized. And we have just made, this is just about 14 months old for us, and we're already almost there. But the important point to remember that every commentator on the goods and services tax has said that it will give us 1 to 1.5 to 2% fillip in the GDP growth rate. That's what the estimates have been. That will be the positive impact of the GST. And so far this year, we are achieving 7.5% rate of growth with only the negative impact of GST on us. Because our exporters have been affected badly because we have not been able to reimburse the funds. Our small-scale producers have had working capital problems. Lots of people have not been able to not been able to enter the GST network, etc. So the positive impact of GST is yet to unfold, and that is what makes me say that we are going to be achieving higher rates of growth as we go forward. Similarly, for our insolvency and bankruptcy code that has just been launched. I was talking to the chair of the IBBI, the Insolvency Bankruptcy Board of India, Mr. Sahu, yesterday, and he was telling me that we already have 917 cases for resolution with the NCLT, the National Commission of what is it called, Tribunal, there, and 300 of them have been resolved. 7,000 are pending to be registered with the NCLT. They are going to double the number of the number of judges or the number of regulators on the NCLT in the next 1 year or two, because for the first time we are seeing that banks, the creditors, the companies themselves are coming forward for seeking resolution in quick time rather than waiting for years, and the average time it is expected for exit from Indian business, which was estimated to be 10 years earlier by the World Bank, will come down successively to a matter of 24 to 48 months, which will be a huge improvement on the whole ease of doing business in India. You know that the ease of doing business will climb 40 ranks in the last 1 year. But the more important thing is the Department of Industrial Promotion and Policy so far has produced 3 rankings of our states, which are based on what the official machinery in these states has done to improve the ease of doing business. And people have said, well, this is what the governments have told us, it's not something on the ground. For the first time, ladies and gentlemen, in 2018-19, you will see the Department of Industrial Promotion and Policies coming out with a ranking based on the perception of the businessmen on the ground about how the state governments are performing in ease of doing business. And that be the real reflection. And once this starts, I think from Niti Aayog's point of view, the true nature of competitive federalism will take over in India. And we will then get what I very often call the democratic dividend in the country. But the states are going to start competing for attracting investment. The states are going to start competing to improve governance, to make their climate better for the investors. And once that happens, I think you will see the investment climate improving, qualitatively, because really the great majority of the action, the real action, lies within the states if we go forward. So, and then you have, of course, the government having taken the courage to have a statutory monetary policy committee to give inflation target to the Reserve Bank of India, afford them complete autonomy, so that we have an anchored inflation, so that inflation expectations will not be allowed to run amok as we go forward. You have also the Real Estate Regulation Act, the RERA, which has meant that the speculative demand from real estate has moved out, and the real estate now is available at lower prices to actual users, to actual young people can for the first time afford to buy houses, which they could not because the prices were up there, and therefore you will see, it's a fact, it's captured in the data, that the retail credit offtake for buying real estate, etc., has gone up very high because of this sort of, this reform. So, and then you have, of course, the Jan Dhan, where, believe you or not, more than 310 million accounts were opened. And today you have more than 20,000 crore rupees of deposits in those accounts. So that financial inclusion is beginning to take place. And over and above that, and let me finish for the reform process, you have the digitization of the financial transactions. So you have the UPI and the BHIM, the two things going along, where you are now crossing ₹1 trillion in digital transactions. So we are behind China. We are not yet there. We are still using currency and plastic and so on, but nonetheless, that movement has also started, which would mean that the financial inclusion will be much higher. But the biggest thing in all of this, is our Prime Minister's insistence that we have to convert development into a Jan Andolan, into a mass movement. I think that is what is, I think, to me, the biggest, most important point. For the first time in our country, people are talking about openly, the political leadership is talking about openly, the fact that development will not be from top to bottom. Development will not be the prerogative of some of us sitting in Lutyens' Delhi. But the development will be a participative process where every Indian, where every citizen would participate and think of it as his or her duty to make India's development as good as possible and take it as forward. And he gives a wonderful analogy, and that in 1942, for the first time when Mahatma Gandhi made the independence movement a people's movement in India, before which it was not. It was still the activity of the elite before 1942. Once he made that into a people's movement, it took us only 5 years to achieve our independence without much cost, if you like. Similarly, if we make development now into a mass movement in India, and this is something which I feel could be where South Asia would benefit in some terms, in many ways, by adopting this, I am convinced that this transformation, this economic transformation, will also be completed as a result of that. The third aspect of this economic transformation is that you will agree with me that there cannot be a society, there cannot be an economy which wants to be a private sector-based capitalist market economy which does not take care of those who are at the bottom of the pyramid. It will not work. Since the onset of Keynesian economics, since the fact that you had welfare economics enshrined into capitalism, it's a necessary condition that you must take care of inclusion, not just in rhetoric, but in real terms. And this is where, again, this government has taken up the schemes that some of which Dr. Wagle mentioned, which have never been taken up before. But not just taken up, but actually implemented. Now, I want to mention to you here, example, the scheme called the Aspirational District Scheme, where Niti Aayog has been charged to identify 115 most backward districts in the country on the basis of about 29 criteria, and then each district there has been appointed a Prabhari officer, a focal point officer from the central government and one from the state government, and the Niti Aayog then oversees the fact that how at the level of the district all the ministries and all the agencies converge to achieve an improvement in their human development indices. The idea being that if we can get these districts to move toward the national average for the human development indices, the rest will take care of itself. This is and this philosophy is, of course, that of the late Deen Dayal Upadhyay, who talked about Antyodaya, which is that the last in the queue needs to be taken care of, and then the rest will follow. By the way, this is not new to India. The World Bank, at one point of time, I think under the chief economist Francois Bourgogne, had started talking about measuring the change in the per capita income of the last decile of the population to estimate the welfare improvement in the society. So it's not something that is just peculiar to India or the India Upadhyaya ji. It is something that has been accepted in the development literature. Similarly, we have schemes. Never before the Prime Minister of India had talked about Swachh Bharat. The cleanliness, the hygiene, the factor, because the fact remains that something like 30% of the Indian poor people would fall prey to the unhealthy conditions, and therefore slip back into, get affected by some diseases and slip back into poverty because of the trauma that they got from the diseases. Like Swachh Bharat today means that it has become a national, we've constructed about, I think, 80 million new toilets. There is a movement in every village at the block level, etc., to start talking about public hygiene, as well as much better facilities for our girl students and girl child and the women, because that simply was not going to be acceptable to a society which calls itself into in economic transition. Ladies and gentlemen, believe you me, and I've seen it on the ground, Swachh Bharat is a reality in the country today. Now, agreed, not all the toilets are working. It's a fact that that there are some problems like connection to the water, etc., etc. But people are taking courage. District administrations are taking courage. State governments have been asked to get third-party evaluation of this scheme wherever possible, which is the other big deal that you have in this. So Swachh Bharat. You've also similarly got the JAM Trinity, where we are using the Jan Dhan account along with the mobile phones and the Aadhaar. Now today you have about 1 billion people with their unique identities, as a result of which 400 schemes have been transferred to direct benefit transfer, and therefore about, I think, 82,000 to a lakh crore rupees of leakages has been stopped, so that the money beneficially gets directly credited to their accounts. So that's the other part of the infusion. There are several others that I could mention to you, and I can go on and on. So, but the key point is here that for the first time, I think, a government in Delhi is saying that it is our responsibility to make sure that the delivery of public services is effective, is transparent, and accountable. And I think that's the key as we're talking about it. And the biggest thing here about governance is the improvement in accountability at all levels. And I'll give you just one example. We in Niti Aayog, and by the way, Dr. Wagle, Niti Aayog has nothing at all to do with the Planning Commission. It is not a new incarnation, it's a completely brand new organization with a completely new mandate. In Niti Aayog, we have an organization called the Development Monitoring Evaluation Office, which does real-time evaluation of at least 12 ministries of the central government and all its schemes based on performance and outcomes. We have real-time dashboard, which is now continuously filled with data from these ministries, and we present to the Prime Minister, in the presence of the heads of department, a review every quarter of what has been achieved in these ministries. That level of accountability has now been enshrined, or is getting enshrined into the system. Similarly, we have 11 lakh Anganwadi workers in our villages, which are supposed to, which look after our young children and are in charge also of the National Nutrition Program. The Ministry of Women and Child Development, lo and behold, and I happen to be the chairman of the National Nutrition Mission, they have installed a real-time dashboard in their ministry where every Anganwadi worker on a daily basis is inputting data on what she or he has achieved in that particular day, because each one is being supplied with a mobile phone and a smartphone as you go forward. Each one has been done that. I believe about 4.5 to 5 lakhs are already on board. By the end of December, each one would be. So that the whole process of keeping manual ledgers, noting these things down, taking months to, for the data to filter up, is all going to be besides the point. And that is where I hope, that India will be able to get over this unacceptable blemish of having 38% of its children still undernourished, and we'll be able to achieve this target. So that level of accountability, that level of efficiency, that focus on the delivery to the last in the queue, the bottom of the pyramid, to make sure that those who do not have the initial conditions, the initial endowments that we have as elite, I think this is what differentiates this government from the others, and this to me is the assurance that we will be able to now sustain our growth at 8% plus going forward with macro stability and also, if you like, social inclusion, and therefore, their benefits going down, not just trickling down, but actually being achieved to the people out there at the grassroots level. So much for, but there are two other things that I just want to mention here, which is, I think, very important. One is our attempt at Niti Aayog to create an innovation ecosystem in the country. And I think this is critical for South Asia. Because the South Asian societies are characterized quite often by this word jugaad, but which is not the same thing as innovation. Innovation is totally different. We are not inculcating the innovative spirit in our school children or in our universities. We still have outdated curriculums and outdated methods of pedagogy, etc. And what Niti Aayog has decided is being doing to have established something called the Atal Innovation Mission. And the public-private partnership, the best example of that is that the managing director of the Atal Innovation Mission is on deputation from the Tata Consultancy Services to Niti Aayog. And and picks up still its salary because we can't afford the man. But he is the one who's running this Atal Innovation Mission within Niti Aayog. And the Atal Innovation Mission has been charged to establish what we call the Atal Tinkering Labs in schools, in secondary schools, junior and senior secondary schools. And for the first time, in terms of what we've achieved, less than 2 years, 2,000 of these labs have already been established. 1,856 of them have already been, the money has been given to them, and they are now already working. They've got 5,000 mentors have registered themselves, all voluntary, from IIT graduates to teachers to people. They are mentoring these labs. We will establish 5,000 of these tinkering labs by the end of March 31st. I happen to chair the board of the Atal Innovation Mission, and we just had a meeting a day before, and all these numbers are on track. So that's at the school level. At the higher level, we are establishing 50 Atal incubation centers, which each one of which will get 10 crores or more of rupees funding as grant to incubate, the new ideas, to incubate new innovations. 19 of them already established and working, and the rest going forward. And we established 200 of these in the years to come, and that is the target to go. We are also now just beginning to, this is something that we just have, established a small business innovation research program, the SBRI, in 6 ministries of India, who will then have to set up a corpus of funds to encourage innovation in medium and small and medium enterprises, which are going to be the drivers of growth going forward. My wish really is, ladies and gentlemen, that somehow if we could include the Nepalese schools in the program for tinkering labs, it would be such an amazing thing to happen. We already have a situation where I think on the 4th and the 5th, we have some children from Russia coming over and working with those children who have done some innovations from Atal Tinkering Lab, and I hope they will be able to present their innovation to the 2 leaders when they meet in a summit. I think something like that would be amazing, because the same thing can be transferred here, and this will be very good for the, and same thing for the incubation centers, if we could do something on those lines. So that's the one big thing. The second, and this, let me end by the innovation system. The last target objective of AIM would be to bring about a coherence, to bring about a synergy between the public and the private science and technology systems. Because they two, at the moment, they do work in parallel. The private corporate sector's R&D and the science and technology system, if we can bring that together, it will create a synergy which will be quite enormous and significant. The last thing on the Indian side, and then I come to, I'm sorry if I'm running, I'll just take, is our work on climate change and mobility, etc. The Prime Minister, as you know, has committed India to nationally determined targets, which are quite ambitious. He has set up the International Solar Alliance, and just very recently, he participated in for 3 hours and had encouraged for us to do what we call the Mobility Summit, which is India's attempt to leap forward into this whole era of zero emission vehicles and transportation. Shared, connected, zero emission transportation, whereby we want to reduce our dependence on imported hydrocarbons and also at the same time reduce our, reduce our pollution and environment. Again, something which I submit to you, Nepal would benefit greatly by joining forces with us. Because if you, with your solar and hydel power resources, if you can switch to electric mobility, if you like, which is battery based and solar power based, I think your dependence and your economy and your society will have a completely different future going forward. Quite briefly, because I've taken up too much time on the India-Nepal relations, let me just sort of say that I find in this Prime Minister a person who is inordinately committed to improving relations with the neighborhood. He has tried everything that he could really to improve relations, all around the country, and he's made it very clear that that is his principle, his primary, priority, which is to get a neighborhood, where India and its neighbors are working together and growing together. As a result of which, I think it's unprecedented that he has visited here 4 times. He's done the same thing with other countries, in the region. And I think he believes quite clearly that India, being what it is in this neighborhood, has to have an asymmetric approach towards its neighbor. And a quid pro quo approach will not work, has not worked, and I think he's prepared for that. And I think this is therefore a time where relationships between India and Nepal can really flower and go forward. And I think he had given us the 5 T's when he came here, I think in May, and which is the 5 T's were that India-Nepal relations would be based on tradition, trade, tourism, technology, and transport. Each one of them, Dr. Wagle, I could speak here for half an hour each on each one of them, as to what the potential would be. The potential is enormous. The potential is enormous. The fact is that because all of us know that the potential is enormous, and all of us also know that these relationships are go back into history, into the sort of as long back as they do, we often take these for granted on both sides. And that is something that we need to change. And I dare say that in the present ambassador to Kathmandu, you have a person who doesn't suffer from that one weakness. He will not take anything for granted, and he will continue to work on it. And this is, I think, what we need as we go forward, because every relationship between, as you know, long married husbands and wives need to be worked at. Otherwise, they do end up, and in this era of globalization, where everybody has a choice, and a choice which works, I think you cannot have a situation where you could say that the default option is always there. There is no default option. There is something that you need to work on. I think that is need to go forward. Let me just say, but again, it will be useful to come on doing question answers, that there are now significant efforts ongoing to improving connectivity, which are not just on paper, but which are actually on the ground. Cross-border rail linkages between, New Jalpaiguri and Kakarghita, between Nepalganj Road and Nepalganj. I think these are. Then you have the Raxaul Kathmandu rail link was announced. But the good news is that following that, a feasibility study has already been commissioned, and therefore you've got an engineering study now being done by an organization with a timeline that it will be completed. So it's not just going to be on paper, it's going to be something that the Indian government and the Nepalese government are both committed to. So the rail links are going to be open, the road links are being multiplied, the air links, and this is where I got my facts wrong with the notes that I got, said that there are 13 cities from which there are flights today to Kathmandu. But I was corrected on the way here, saying that look, some of these have started and stopped, from Lucknow and Patna and so on. And this is, but if they have, this is something where you mentioned the word Udan, and I have been talking to my colleagues in the Ministry of Civil Aviation, that Udan 3, which is now being designed, will include connectivity from India's regions to their international things abroad, to the international destinations abroad. If that happens, you could find regional connectivity between the state capitals in India to Kathmandu and to other parts of the country increasing much better, where the viability gap funding could be coming from the state government, some from the Nepalese government perhaps, and also from the central government. So that's something in the making, and I see a very bright future. Last point on connectivity, etc., is that I have been, and some people here know, been a great votary, a proponent of improving connectivity and relations between India's 5 states that border Nepal and Kathmandu. So I think that connectivity and relationship between Lucknow and Patna and Guwahati with Kathmandu, I think can be improved and should be improved, and those state governments must be engaged in doing this, because there would, I believe, be much greater motivation to do so as we go forward. Ladies and gentlemen, let me, I have not been able to talk about inland waterways, etc. I have not been able to talk about, the hydropower potential. I am thrilled to find that Arun 3 and Upper Karnali are actually now up and going. We've been waiting for this for ever so long. All that is wonderful. I have always maintained that the day Nepal starts exporting some of its power to India, it will be a turning point for many things in this region. But let me end by saying that, that the biggest connectivity that we need is really a connectivity of trust. And I think that is what we need to really work on. A trust which is very often, again, taken for granted, but I think which has been eroded sometimes in the past. And I think whatever we need to do to restore and build this trust will be the cornerstone of positive, improving and prospering Indo-Nepalese relations in the future. Thank you very much.